Today I'm speaking with Deb Fillman, and Deb, you have an extensive background in education, and you produce a lot of content on education and what's going on in our education system, as well as running support groups and doing parent coaching. And so I was just asking you right before we hit record to kind of like, how do you think of yourself? And it sounds like you primarily think of yourself as a teacher. And could I get you to just elaborate a little bit on your background and on this recording and content production project that you have going? Because I think that there's a lot of value in what you're doing. But I struggle to, I like many people right now in this, I guess, this new internet connected world, we're wearing a lot of hats and it's hard to really sum up what exactly our role is. So
Right.
perhaps you could give a little background.
Sure. So as you pointed out, I do see myself primarily as a teacher. It's interesting because I didn't set out of college to become a teacher. I just kind of fell into it because I wanted to do something that mattered. I was, kind of naive, like a lot of 20 somethings, and I'd had a very mixed school experience. And I thought to myself, well, I can make it better. Right. So there's this urge in me to help people understand things that are going on. Even in my professional career, when I wasn't teaching, I was working in user experience for a web design company. So like I left teaching because I saw that I wasn't a good fit for the curriculum stuff that was going on, which we now see.
Mm.
And I went to work for a group of companies, and I ended up in an agency where we designed interaction and so forth. And I'm always wearing that hat of, how can I translate this into something the majority of people can understand?
Mm.
Um, when I first started noticing that things were seriously awry in education in America, again, wearing my teacher hat, I truly believe that most parents, because I had kids in school, I'm a parent, I have 3 children. And at the time, I homeschooled them when they were young. And then because of divorce, they had to go into public school. And I didn't want them to because I knew what was
Mm.
going on in there. So I got very involved. I volunteered. I talked to other parents. I thought maybe, and it really wasn't landing. I felt like people I spoke with were so fearful or
Mm.
hesitant to question what authorities were telling them, what the principal was telling them, what anybody in a position of power was telling them. You would see the looks on their faces like, I'm not really comfortable with it either, but surely they wouldn't be hurting my child. Surely they mean well. They say they mean well. And what struck me is how similar their reactions were to things that I knew for a fact to be lies. So, in other words, because of my background in education, and I
Mm.
have a master's degree and so forth, and I spent a lot of time digging into what was going on well before like 2020,
Mm.
I knew they were being gaslit about what was being done, and yet they weren't seeing it. So it was very reminiscent of people in an abusive relationship, people in a relationship with someone who's very charming,
Mm.
says, I just want you to be a better person. I'm just trying to help you. And the reason I picked up on that is that for a couple of years, I actually led a support group
Mm.
from about 2015 to 2017. I led a support group for survivors of narcissistic abuse. I had been in a relationship like that. I had to get through that, the end of that relationship, which I ended. And, to get through it, I had done a lot of reading and self-reflection. And I realized, wait a minute, thinking back to my own mother, some of the
Mm.
things, for example, that Josh Slocum talks about,
Mm.
that there was sort of a cycle that had been perpetuated even in my own life. So I thought, I want to find a support group. It didn't
Mm.
exist, so I created it.
Mm.
And when I started, there were like 3 people coming. And by the time I passed it off to somebody else, because there was just only so long I could spend in that headspace,
Mm.
there were about 30 people regularly coming and, cycling in and out every month to our meetings. And it was the same story over and over again. I didn't feel like I was qualified to evaluate it. The problem must be me. I'm the
Mm.
only one. I'm the only one who sees this way. Or the people telling me that it is what I see, I'm not sure I trust them because they're biased, mom or dad or somebody else. Um, Lots of self-blame, lots of questioning of their own perception, which was the same thing I was seeing in parents, that they would look to the highest authority they could look to. So principal, teacher, possibly direct, superintendent. And they might ask one question or two, why is this happening? Why are you doing this? And it wouldn't take much. It was almost like the Milgram studies. We just, we're the expert. Are you a teacher? Do you have background in this? We know what's happening. And, you hand them to us because we're the experts. We're credentialed. We're certified. And most people, the vast majority, would defer. And sometimes they would just sort of amiably tolerate me trying to get them to push a little harder. Other times they would push back hard and say, I trust them. No, it's fine. And why are you trying to get me to see things? I need to send my child to school. Why are you trying to get me to question it? And then as time wore on, we got into the territory where I believe we are now, which is I'm afraid to push back. So it went from I'm not qualified to I don't want to upset my own apple cart. I need the childcare. I need the whatever to I'm actively afraid to be on anybody's radar. And this is very similar to what you see happen with people in abusive relationships. Initially, they kind of like denial, they make excuses for the person. He had a bad day. She's had some troubles in her life, whatever. And then as things become harder to ignore, the abusive behavior becomes more obvious and more obvious. The gaslighting gets more obvious. They progress through the stages, and rather than go, whoa, you were right, I got to get out of here. Instead, it's like the rationalizations get bigger. They push away the people who are trying to help and so on. So when I started this project, a little over 2 years, I mean, it's about 3 years now, my initial goal was putting on my teacher's hat. I want to try to explain these things to people wherever they are. So I want to approach them, not judgy, like, how could you be so dumb? Because it doesn't work with people in abusive relationships. They run away. So I try to approach it as, look, I realize there are a lot of big words and they're throwing a lot of terms at you that make it seem like they're really smart and you can't possibly understand what they're doing because you don't have the education. But let me translate. So I tried to serve as a translator and put these things in very simple terms. I also, just like I did in the support group, tried to help parents refocus on their core values and their core principles, which are always somewhere inside of you. They just may be buried under mountains and mountains of stuff, to get them to believe, to think about what they really believe about themselves and their intentions towards their children, and about what the project was that they embarked on when they had children. So none of us had a child and looked down and said, I can't wait for the government to get its hands on you and, brainwash you into thinking everything it does is fabulous. And to, in fact, have you turn on me and tell me that I'm an idiot. But, go forth and prosper. Nobody ever did that. We had dreams. We imagined maybe not specific careers, but we imagined our children being happy, healthy, well-adjusted, self-sufficient adults. And hopefully those of us who were, emotionally mature knew that we were not perfect, that we were probably much more perfect parents before we had kids. And then we realized, whoa, we also probably realized that our children were going to be born with certain unique qualities and talents that we couldn't possibly predict and we can't make happen. And I think if you ask most people with an infant, they say, yes, I want to support whoever they are and help them reach their potential. That would be like the phrase I would imagine most parents would use. I want my child to have the opportunity to reach his or her full potential. But I still suggested that they articulate for themselves, that theirs would be different. Their philosophy of education and parenting would be different from mine, but they needed to sit down and figure out what it was. Just like I can't tell somebody else what the right kind of relationship is for them. All I can do is tell you what is objectively abusive. That we can do. I can't tell them what objective, what their version of a happy, healthy childhood is going to look like for their kid. And that's what I tried to do, is be a translator and a support and a teacher to help people make their own decisions about what was right. That's not to say I'm not biased. Obviously, we're all biased about what we think is ultimately probably the best for the greatest number of kids. But I'm not a doctor. I don't write prescriptions. I just tell people, these are the steps I think you should go through to figure it out. And then remember, you're the parent. You have the power. And I saw it just like this abusive relationship dialogue.
So it's in helping people get in touch with their own core beliefs and values. You're helping them to reconnect with their own authority and not rely so much and not doubt themselves so much in the face of these outside authorities. And it sounds like that observation coming from your perspective on narcissistic abuse was a real light bulb, realizing that this was the situation that you were seeing with the schools. What year about was this when you sort of made this connection, and what were the topics in which this was in relation to? Like we weren't seeing, probably, it sounds like you said pre-2020. So was it already this gender stuff? Was it the race stuff? Or was it just some general way that people were being treated in school, or something else?
I know exactly when it was. It was 2017.
Okay.
I had 3 children at that time in the public schools, 2 in a public charter, 1 in a public IB school. And one of my children in the public charter was experiencing situations that I would say align with what we now know are critical race theory and DEI, labeled as such. There was a segregated field trip to go to a science fair for, women in STEM or something, but they only took the girls of color. Even though the event itself was not segregated by color, the teacher who decided to take a week off of school and take students told my daughter explicitly, no, you can't come.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so I went to the chairman of the board of the school, and first I went to the head of school. Then the head of school went to the head of the whole charter system. They had a middle and an elementary. And then the chairman of the board asked to see me, and I thought, okay, this is good. This means they think it's important. At the same time, I'd also gotten in touch with a journalist and said, if this doesn't go well, I think maybe we need to let people know what's going on. And I had some video from Instagram that they had posted where the teacher was doing a chant in the Washington, D.C. metro that was a very political chant about the president with the students. We don't like Trump. We don't like Trump. And they were jumping up and down.
Okay.
And so I felt like it was politicized and segregated. And all of this was putting on the public Instagram for the parents and the students, but they were wearing school T-shirts. And, I just felt like this was not okay.
Yeah.
I went in, I actually even recorded that conversation, which I still have. I've just never cut it into clips or anything. And rather than hear me out or say, wow, this is serious and important, and, we shouldn't have this, which is what I would have expected, for all the things I thought they did wrong academically. So I thought there were a lot of things they did wrong academically that people were being gaslit about, reading, all that. I genuinely believed, this is how naive I was, that this chairman of the charter board would hear about a segregated school trip and say, that is atrocious and this should not have happened. And, and instead he and the director of the school that helped him start the schools told me, you can't go to the press. We're trying to open a high school next, and you are going to destroy my ability to fund that project if you go to the press. And I remember thinking, I don't know how that enters into this.
Yeah.
But okay, let's continue.
Okay.
And then he went on to basically gaslight and deny that what occurred was racist. And then the director of the school backed it up as well. Like that, what happened, they began to explain that affinity grouping is good. Research shows that when students can align with their racial groups, blah, blah, blah. And I felt like I stepped into a time machine and got zapped back to like Jim Crow, but in reverse, listening to them speak. And I just remember like, what is going on? And so I would bring something up about how it was negatively impacting my child. It's like, I'm not imagining that it might. I am telling you that it is, and she's not the only one.
Yeah.
And the way they stopped just short of saying, no, she's not, like a true gaslighting, but they came right up to the edge of accusing me of either making it up or that my daughter didn't feel what she is saying she felt. Or finally, after they got past, that wasn't sticking. I made it clear that wasn't sticking. They went right to, well, she's wrong to feel that way.
Wow.
So through all the stages that you would have in typical narcissistic gaslighting, it didn't happen. Well, if it happened, then, you're just perceiving it wrong. And then, yeah, it happened, but it's your fault. It's your fault that you feel bad about it. And all of a sudden I was zapped back to leading the support group and even going through my own experiences in narcissistic relationship. And the light bulb went on that if they're doing this to me, a parent, not just a parent, but a parent who has a master's in education who's
Mm-hmm.
coming in and saying, look, I can cite you chapter and verse research about child development at this stage and what children's imperative is morally and ethically and so on and so forth. And I can tell you from personal anecdotal experience what's happening to my child and some of her peers and so on. And to have them, no, I knew just immediately, this is not a one-off.
Mm-hmm.
This can't be. This wouldn't be so. They wouldn't be looking at me with these little smiles, these weird, eerie smiles
Mm-hmm.
on their faces.
Wow.
And it was they threatened me. They didn't come right out and say we are going to sue you,
Mm-hmm.
but they did say if this goes to the press, and they would lose their funding. And they said we're going to have to consider what action we'll take, which so makes it pretty clear.
Wow.
So I, to my everlasting shame, contacted the journalist
Mm-hmm.
in part because I was still in a contentious custody situation. I'm divorced and I share custody. And they even mentioned during the meeting, they said, is their father on board with this? Does he agree with you about this? Well, maybe we should check in with him, this kind of thing, which is abusive. Like
Yeah.
right out of the gate, let's get
Yeah.
that clear. That is a kind of emotional blackmail. He's not here. I notice he's not here. Does he agree? This kind of thing.
They were intimidating you any way they could.
Of course they do, because in the material, it's parent one, parent two, different addresses. They'd
Mm-hmm.
done their homework.
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized in an instant, in a flash, if I go to the press and I put myself on the radar and they feel like the money coming in for their high school is threatened because they've got bad press, and they decide to loop in my ex-husband, and he decides this publicity is very bad for our children, it's goodbye custody.
Mm-hmm.
It could be very bad for me, because in North Carolina, where I live, you get the same judge
Mm-hmm.
through your entire life. I mean, basically, once you're
Oh,
assigned
wow.
a family court judge,
Mm-hmm.
that is your judge for the remainder of any legal action that you will take, as long as they're
Mm-hmm.
still in office.
Mm-hmm.
That judge is an elected Democrat. She's still in office.
So you had a sense that this judge wouldn't be on your side if there was some political issue.
100%,
Mm-hmm.
because right as we were homeschooling was the status quo, if you
Mm-hmm.
recall, upon the divorce. And when I went in to try to, talk about whether it's spousal support or what schooling and everything,
Mm-hmm.
this judge looked at my record and she said, you have a master's degree, correct? I said, yeah. She said, get a job.
Wow.
As if I wasn't going to, like, first of all. But being a single parent
Yeah.
does not preclude you, or having to work does not preclude homeschooling.
No.
But and she even went so far as to say, my children went to public school and it was fine for them.
Oh,
And
really?
so she made it very clear in the course of the proceedings that there was a bias. And generally speaking, in family court, the bias is going to be with the government. I mean, that's common sense.
Right. Yeah.
You'd have to bring to bear expert testimony, doctors, psychologists, all kinds of records. Child has a super special need that can't be met, to continue to homeschool. My kids are just 3 regular kids who was being homeschooled. So
Yeah.
yeah. So that's where the light bulb went off. And I knew this is not okay.
And you realized that because you were more assertive and more educated than a lot of parents, that if this was being done in your case, this had to be more broadly happening to a lot of people.
Had to be. And the other test was that even after this event, because I couldn't pull my children from the school, I thought, well, maybe I can just work with the individual school on individual issues. So, for example, there was a restorative justice situation that came up where one of the students, who was a friend of my daughter's, had gone to a Trump for Women rally.
Mm-hmm.
And she went into school, and then they were at recess outside, and the girl pulled out she had brought back a poster, but it was small and it was in a tube. And they were out at recess, and she said, hey, you guys, I want to show you what I got from the rally. She was super excited. I mean, the kids were, they were like 13, they're young kids. And she was just excited to be part of the process with her parents. So she shows us. And I think there were about 4 or 5 kids standing around outside. It's like adjacent to the parking lot. And another boy walked by, and he saw her unroll this and heard her say the word Trump. And he jumps into the group and he says, did you just say Trump? And she says, yeah, why? I went to this rally with my parents. And this kid went off on her and started screaming, say F Trump, F Trump, F Trump, say it, and got right up in her face. And there was a boy with them who was a little taller than this other boy. And he just went up to me and he said, back off, like get away from her. And so some yelling ensued. There was no hands flying or anything, it was like, no, I will not. You say it. No, she's not going to say it. Whatever. And the girl was pretty tough too. And she said, I'm not going to. And the teacher who was monitoring came over to them. And my daughter at this point standing by the tree. Like she's just kind of standing there observing this whole thing. These are her friends, but she wasn't really participating along with a couple other kids. And they were all brought into the office, every single person who was standing in that little cluster of kids.
Mm-hmm.
And once they ascertained what happened, so who said what to whom, whatever, they were all made to apologize to each other, like all. And then they were made to sit in a session, a circle, where they each would go around saying, their point of view and apologizing and all these things. And what was made clear to my daughter, who was at this point furious because she had to miss her Chinese class. She took Mandarin as her language, took an entire class period to sit there and essentially have to hear how threatened and, scared this boy was because, you see, he's Hispanic. And my kids were told, well, you see, he's Hispanic and Trump is racist. And that's why he's so scared. And he sees Trump as a harm to him and his family. And you need to understand his perspective. And so, my daughter's coming and telling me this. I'm like, oh my God. So I decided to do a little project where I called all the parents involved, their children, the parents of the children involved, because I figured if they were participating in a conversation in a semi-positive way about Trump, at least they were open to free speech. Okay. And then I went through the list of parents at the school. It's a fairly small school. This is going to sound insane, but I checked Open Secrets to see if they had made donations to candidates. Again, seeing, are there any people who've made donations, like at least across the aisle, like back and forth, there's some mixture thereof, or not solidly blah, 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 blah. Maybe I can call them, because I feel like, one person goes in to complain, it's a crazy person. Two people, it's a crazy person with a friend. Yeah. You get to 3 and 4 people, and now maybe they have to listen. And I thought, perhaps we can do something. So I called, I think it was about 8 families, all told, that seemed to me to be like not specifically partisan in one way or another. Every single one of them agreed with me. Every single one of them said this is a huge problem. And they thought, one gentleman was adamant. He said, this is crazy. I can't believe they're doing this. It's so obviously political indoctrination going on over there, et cetera, et cetera. I said, well, will you go with me if I set a meeting? Oh, no, I couldn't possibly. And this is after a 10-minute conversation where he was unloading on me how frustrated he was. But, oh, no, I couldn't possibly. And I said, well, can you explain why? I'm genuinely curious why that is. And he says, well, if I do, and then, there's more of them, meaning the people who agree with this, than us. We're not going to make them change. They can kick my kid out. So it's a charter school. They can kick my kid out. And then my kid's going to have to go to the other public school, which is worse. My wife's going to hate me, blah, blah, blah. He had like 17 reasons why he couldn't do anything about it. Yeah. But he agreed with me. And so those situations combined made me realize this is a huge problem. This is a huge problem because these are parents. Some of them, I believe, really had options. Like in theory, they could have sent their kids to private school if they really wanted to. And they still said no. It baffled me. These were mostly intact families. Nobody I called was a single parent who could say, I can't even pull my kids out of this abusive situation. So I realized this is big. If we've got people who have options. No, I didn't. People have asked me, why didn't you pull your kids out right then and there? I just explained why. In a divorce situation, both parents have to agree if you have equal custody. And if one of the parents says, no, public school is good enough for me, that's where it is, period. Both have to agree. So I was precluded by court order from pulling my kids out, but other people weren't. And the fact that they stayed in was absolutely baffling to me. So
this quandary with talking with like-minded people who are who feel strongly but don't want to do anything about it. It's something that transcends just this educational thing, and it's something that we see all over the place. And it seems like it comes down to sort of a risk-reward strategy. Like, how bad is this? Can we weather this? Are we going to be fine? Do we have to say something now? Is it better to do something where we put our heads down for self-preservation, or do we see the threat as so big that we need to confront the threat? And it's really frustrating to be someone who sees this as a big threat and sees the power of bringing more people to the table for negotiation, and to have the potential allies kind of disappear into the bushes behind you.
That's right. I had gone to school board meetings as well. I didn't ever speak, but I went and listened and observed parents and observed what they were asking for. And the other thing I noticed is they were asking for things that either the school board didn't have the authority to give them, or that the school board would be disinclined to give them because the number of people opposed to what they wanted was so much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So philosophically, I've always questioned the legitimacy of a government-run education system going back to graduate school. But this is also the point at which I firmly became an abolitionist, where I firmly became a person who says, yes, I want to end the public school system, the government school system, because watching what happens to something as important as education, and then, of course, the children who are in it, be subjected to this political process. This is never going to go well. Once you put something to the vote, it's a numbers game. And so and it isn't even about getting the greatest number of people to agree. It's about getting the greatest number of people to be afraid to not agree. And that's what I was seeing. And that's what I still see to this day. The majority of Americans are basic. What do you want to call it? We used to be a center-right nation. Now we're probably a little center-left nation. But the point is, the vast majority of Americans call themselves independent. We have the largest percentage of people who are not registered with any party. And, there seems to be I don't want to rock the boat kind of feeling. And I genuinely believe we've got 80% of people who are just self-censoring, and I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to lose my job, cancel culture and so forth. And the 20% who are extremely loud, and very aggressive. And as you pointed out, that's across all the different iterations of this ideology of domination or whatever. And we know it has a name, it's neo-Marxism, but as James Lindsay has pointed out, there are these different sort of species, but they all fall under the same thing. It's all about control. It's all about collectivism. The idea that the individual is sovereign and that individual agency and individual rights are sacrosanct in America is barely on life support. And I genuinely think part of the reason it's there is that too many people are afraid to defend it or don't know how to defend it.
Yeah, and I'm really curious about the abolitionism of public school. How did you come to that? It's a really strong stance. I'm interested in hearing more about that. It seems so, as a teacher, to say I think we should get rid of the government school project altogether.
Yes.
How did that come up, and what does that look like? What's an alternative?
Right. So I've been asked this a lot. I think in principles, and so principally it's wrong. The Constitution has no provision in there to empower the government to, they have the power to tax, but not to tax us to then compel us to hand over our children to their care 9 months out of the year, 8 hours a day. And initially, even when they initiated the project, it wasn't 5 days a week, it wasn't 9 months a year, and it wasn't 8 hours a day. It's grown and grown and grown and grown. I'm a student of history. I majored in American studies, and I've observed that whenever the government has been given this level of state authority to compel, it grows it gets bigger. It doesn't get smaller, doesn't sunset itself. And so I think when something is important as your child's worldview, self-perception, mental health, physical health, really the entire direction of their life, is going to be done by a self-interested party, and the government is self-interested. That is a huge red flag. That's a problem. So philosophically, I'm opposed to it because of the massive conflict of interest with the individual. It just doesn't work. You're using, what is this, not only socialist in its structure, we're going to coercively take the money for the project. We're then going to compel you to attend the schools that are staffed by people we chose and empowered, to learn things we've chosen to be taught, to meet standards we have chosen, to follow rules and schedules, including when you get to go on vacation, what your summer is, what your weekend is, what your hours of the day are that you can work without obtaining separate childcare. Literally your entire life as an adult, as a parent, is under that umbrella because it's compulsory. Mm-hmm. Now, thanks to the Little Sisters of, the name escapes me, in Oregon, who fought to have private school be allowed and parochial school and so forth, homeschooling is also legal in every state to varying degrees of regulation. But just think about that. I have to let the government know what I'm going to do to raise my children. Mm. I really would love to reframe that. When I talk about being an abolitionist, the flip side of that is I'm a parentist. Mm-hmm. I believe that parents should raise their own children. Mm. Now people say, well, I don't have time. I don't have. If you chose your mother, so their grandmother, or your father, or your aunt or uncle, or a beloved babysitter, or a group of someones that you handpicked because you know them and you trust them and you have the authority to get rid of them if you don't like what they're doing or saying, you're still parenting. They might be the person, there on the ground, but there's going to be open communication. It's going to be a lot more under your auspices. The minute you hand them over to this school, the government is parenting your child. Mm-hmm. In loco parentis used to just, they claim it was for limited purposes. And now it's literally everything. Your child can change their sex and not tell you. So I want people to recognize you are, whether you like it or not, you're co-parenting with the government, and the co is doing a lot of work there because they're not letting you in the building.
Well, it seems like there's an increasing presumption of the incompetence of the family.
100%.
Like there's this, if we don't teach them in schools, then how are they? So, this, not just reading, writing, arithmetic, but also the comprehensive sex ed is a huge one. But
social and emotional learning too.
Yeah. A lot of these things that seem to imply that the family is not capable of imparting these kind of lessons onto their children.
They're not implying it. They're saying it. Mm-hmm. They dispensed with implying it about 10 years ago. Castle this week that's Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning. They're celebrating their 30th anniversary of existence.
Wow.
And they essentially leveraged the product of good parenting. So in other words, students who come from, children who come from probably intact families or families with mature adults who take a lot of interest in them and so on. And so they come into the school with what we would call good manners, the ability to, kind of regulate their reactions to stimuli that, and they noticed, this is uncontested, that those students do well academically. So whatever they're presented with academically, and that is not to say that the school curriculum is great or that getting an A and it is wonderful anymore, but they do what's asked of them. Let's put it that way. And they don't. So they have these good academic results, everything goes smoothly, et cetera. So they observed these high achieving kids, that they had these skills. They then turned around and told people, because of this statistic, that justifies us taking over the teaching of social and emotional skills. So they're leveraging good parenting to say, we're going to do it. And people didn't put it together. So instead of saying, wait a minute, isn't that my job to make sure my child knows how to say please and thank you? And you are a reinforcer. Your role is to reinforce the golden rule, teacher, or to set a set of rules and standards for this environment, this school environment that makes sense and is aligned with the golden rule and so on. And like, don't hit people, take people's stuff and, whatever, be rude to teacher. And you are going to reinforce these things, right? And parents operated on that assumption that they were truly partners with their school. And I'm here to tell you that was never really the case, but it has been definitively not the case for at least the last 30 years. And it went from there are some kids who don't have great home lives to parents can't be trusted, period. So we're going to do it.
That argument about some kids that don't have great home lives, that seems to be the number one argument. Like there are kids that don't get this. And we know that there are parents who are not doing a good job with their kids, some downright abusive, some neglectful, et cetera. So what is your response to that argument?
Well, my response to that argument is that the children, people in the United States are presumed innocent until proven guilty. We don't do collective punishment. We don't do collective judgment. That is literally bias. So to say that because some children have lousy parents or no parents, whatever, we're going to apply the same treatment to everybody is, first of all, prejudging that, well, let's just assume they're all terrible, which in and of itself is not right. It's not just, to use their word. And then you have the problem of iatrogenesis, which is that if you take something that is not broken and you treat it like it is, so I medicate you, I give you chemotherapy, but you don't have cancer, you're poisoning yourself. If I give you pain medication and you don't have pain, you become an addict. So they're taking a real problem that we would all agree exists, that there are, foster kids, there are orphans, or there are kids in abusive households, all kinds of things. But we're taking a treatment that, by the way, does not even 100% work with them. This, let's talk about our feelings and get up in our feelings all the time. I would argue it doesn't actually, but let's say it did. Let's give them their argument. It does not follow that you take the children of the good families and you now superimpose on top of their parents talking about their feelings and so forth at the end of the day or whatever, another set. If nothing else, it creates some kind of confusion. Who should I listen to about how to respond to these social situations? What if my parents' standards of freedom of association are different from the school's standards of freedom of association? So as an example, when we were kids, we were not necessarily forced to share. We were told it's a nice thing to share. This is what good can come of sharing, mutually beneficial, sort of voluntary sharing. But you know what? If you want to play with your toy for a little while then on your own, you're not under any obligation to give it to someone else. We might have said that to our child and just said, be nice about it. Say, oh, not right now, I'm playing. Or we would kind of coach our children in how to maintain their boundaries while still being decent. If you're doing that and your child goes into a school saying, no, we always share. If someone comes along, and especially if they are of one of these marginalized groups and they are, then you should just give it to them free and clear because you owe it. That's how you get rid of the stain of your privilege. Now you have one standard competing with another standard. That's called triangulation. This is what happens in divorced families. Like mom, the mom and dad have a different discipline standard, a different standard, and it causes a lot of problems with the child. Like, I love you both and I don't want to be disloyal. What do I do? Okay. Well, your child is there all those hours in the day. Their main need, in the sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of, security, safety, so in the bottom of the pyramid, or not the bottom, but it's right above the bottom. And these adults are bigger than they are, have power over them, et cetera, and so forth. And they're there all day long. Plus, mom and dad said, be good for teacher, most likely. Did you behave in school and so on? And so they're putting it together. You talk about risk reward. They're putting it together of like, well, this is a standard here. There's 30 people in the room. They're all doing it. They're not questioning it. This is the school. It's like very official. Plus, mom and dad bring me here. That's an implied endorsement. Whether you realize it or not, whether they have the vocabulary to say to you that that's what's happening, that's what goes in their mind. And so then they go home and you question things like, they said, what? They told you to do what? They told you what? Why wouldn't they think you're a little cuckoo? I even had my children, and my children were sort of more aware about the difficulties of why they had to stay in the school. And they didn't want to be there. They would say, can we please go home? I don't want to be in the school, because they'd had homeschooling. So they were kind of aware of their unique situation. And even then, I would get one of my children in particular would, kick the back of the seat in the car every time she'd get in the car, and she'd be like, I don't care if they say no. Why aren't you fighting? Why aren't you telling them no? Why are you making me come here? And let me tell you, that is devastating. To realize that you don't have that choice. So when I say I'm an abolitionist, I'm saying that's the real choice. The real choice is not, I'm going to give you another building that you can take the pile of money we've allocated for you, and that we will decide every election how much it should be and what are you allowed to use it for and what kind of restrictions come along with it or something. No, the real choice is you guys are the parents. You decide how you're going to educate them, just like we decide how to feed them, clothe them, house them, potty train them, everything that we do with them. You're a parent, be a parent. And I know there are people in the audience that say, but what about all those other kids? Okay, here you asked me the solution. What does it look like?
Mm-hmm.
Well, may surprise people. No, we didn't always have a public school system. And I would go and look at things like the breakup of Ma Bell as an example. It's not a perfect analogy, but here we go. We had a massive monopoly for the telecommunications system. It was very expensive. I grew up, you probably still remember too, expensive long distance bills, expensive phone bills. And when that monopoly was broken up and new technologies and new companies could come in, it was not even a year. There were dozens of companies that were just like popping up left and right to service your long distance. You know, some were better than others, and we had to do our homework and we had to do it, but it was also really exciting because we were able to see in real time the price plummet, choices go up, different kinds of packages we could buy. I remember MCI and then this one and that one. I belonged to a little long distance co-op for a little while where part of my bill went to charity. Like I was able to choose these things. So I firmly believe that if the market for education, which is massive, even with government trying to clamp on it. We have people starting micro schools and private schools and pods and homeschool co-ops and, classical schools and so on. Now, I would even say somewhat cynically that they may be doing that with school choice on the horizon because they're like government honeypot of tax money, I can get some. But I would challenge people who say we won't have solutions to go look at what we homeschoolers have to choose from. It is overwhelming. The amount of curriculum people have developed knowing full well they're competing with government. 98 or 9% of people go to government school. So knowing that, they still started companies. They still started little schools. They still started things with taking $0 from the government, $0. And so I think if that money weren't tied up in that government pot that's exposed to politics, that's exposed to frivolous waste, administrative bloat, all these things that don't ultimately result in the education of a child. So how many assistant principals and all, these people. And if that instead were staying in your wallet in the first place, staying in the pockets of the businesses who pay corporate tax, that's where a lot of it comes from. That money could go into the marketplace to create these solutions. And I truly believe that would happen because it is in the best interests of people who need to hire educated employees to do that. So they'll say, there's no motive. Like, do you know how many people I talk to who run companies, even from a restaurant all the way up to a Fortune 500 company, says, I'm having to re-educate these people. I go out to hire people. They can't do math. They can't read and write properly. They can't punctuate an email. They're lazy. They expect me to order them to do everything because they don't have any initiative and so on. People are frustrated even in the workaday world. And whole industries are not getting fed with new people. Aviation is a classic example because the schools have such tunnel vision of go be an activist or go be in social services or something. So if that money were out of the monopoly, I think we would have it would be so robust and so fast. I think people would be shocked how fast it would. The market is there. The drive for better solutions is there. And that's what it would look like. It would be a free market. Go ask, Javier Milei, how is he running Argentina, shutting down all these agencies? Well, so far, so good. I mean, I haven't heard anything about things are collapsing on themselves. So I have faith in the market. I do.
Wow. I have so many questions. Do you know how much of our tax money goes towards education? Is there a percentage that you know?
Well, the percentages vary state by state, but as a nation, we spend close to $1 trillion every year. My state of North Carolina, I've looked at it recently, is roughly, I'd say, close to 2/3 comes from the state. And the other third is a mixture of your county tax and some federal money. The federal money is mostly for special needs, free lunch, Title IX, and all the titles, Title IX, Title I, Title IV, all those things. That comes from the federal government. Your county taxes, believe it or not, are usually not the lion's share of paying for your school. It's your state. Okay. Now, money is fungible, of course, so the amount that they get from the federal government, defrays what they have to take out of their own pot. But, what you pay in a variety of things, road taxes, sales taxes, business taxes. It is the lion's share of that state money comes out of corporate taxation.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people say, but it's my money, I'm like, yeah. I mean, is it though? It is. It's somebody's money. It's all of our money because then the company turns around and charges you more for whatever you're buying. So yes, we're all paying for it, but the one-to-one, it came out of your wallet. In all likelihood, no, it didn't. It likely came out of a corporation's wallet, and then they likely turned around and passed it on to you in the cost of the things you buy. Or quality of things that you buy, or maybe they outsource jobs to China, or who knows what else. But believe it or not, the fact that we have this giant $1 trillion education establishment, the education industrial complex, is also fueling things you don't like outsourcing, like high prices and inflation, because the money has to come from somewhere. Now, mostly we're borrowing it at this point, just like every other dollar that we spend. But just think, if parents were responsible for educating their own children, and then people say, but it's so expensive. I homeschool my daughter for less than $1,000 a year. And obviously I'm not hovering over her right now. She's in 10th grade. Now, because what about the young kids? There are co-ops, there are pods, there are churches, synagogues, community groups. It's amazing what you can start yourself. Former teachers will pull together and make a micro school, and maybe they're not looking to get rich, but they're like, all right, pay some little tuition and, you can come into my micro school. There are so many solutions. And like I said, they don't have to be expensive. So look at what you do in the summer. Look at what you do for other, childcare solutions. Okay. So it's all day, all year.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's probably the number one thing that keeps people from homeschooling, is this fear of what are we going to do with the kids, because school provides a place and it's a safe from violence, safe from danger. They're in a building, you know where they are, you know what's happening. You don't have to make special arrangements to drive them here and there in the middle of the day. The hours are stable, and the thing that they're providing is basically the daycare, so that you can go and do your job. And I homeschool my two sons. I was a really reluctant homeschooler when my older son was we put him in kindergarten, and my ex-husband started immediately clamoring for homeschooling. He didn't like the program. I didn't either, but I thought I want to go back to school. I was about to enter graduate school, and I'd been wanting to do this whole time. I wanted to focus on career. I could not see how I was going to do that and also be home with my kids. I had stayed home with my kids while working a part-time job their first years, and I looked forward to school as a time when I could finally get back on track for some of the things that I wanted to do in life. So I was a really reluctant homeschooler. I figured out ways to do this, and then even as a single mom, figured out ways to do this while working. And I know that it's possible, but for a lot of people, it's hard to break out of that box and imagine, how am I going to make this work?
Right. I know that. And I also know that there are legal, the one I described, plus foster parents are not allowed to homeschool their children. That said, I'm not anti-school. I'm anti-government school. And so what that means is that, and I don't like the word privatization, because that actually means something different. That's, kind of like, putting in the hands of corporations instead of government. And I don't know that that's necessarily good. What I mean by making all education private is that when the market solves these problems, I believe they'll come up with creative solutions for that. There will be schools in communities where people have decided perhaps it would be a church, perhaps it would be, it could even be secularized, but they will decide, look, it's in our best interest as a community to provide this. We know they do this already with after school programs. We know they do this already with youth groups and youth programs. So if, again, the money, you have to go to work, so you have some money. We're not talking, millions, but if you are pooling all those resources plus doing fundraising, and like all charities do, they could solicit to various NGOs and ask for money. Right now, the NGOs are behaving badly, in my opinion, because the incentives are aligned for them to do things in a politicized way to get their ESG scores up or whatever. If you change the incentives, you're going to realign the behaviors. That our incentives right now around education are, believe it or not, they're all around profit. They're all around, and I don't mean the good kind of clean profit where you're not exploiting people, but the kind that says, the kids are the product. Whether it's for data mining to get as much data as you can and then sell the data, whether it's to fill them full of garbage food from your cast off at your food company, or, to keep your business and going because you couldn't sell your horrible food to the regular public. A mother just got in touch with me last week from Colorado saying, do you know why this is happening? And she sent me an email that says, congratulations, you're now eligible for free breakfast and lunch at the school. And she said, that doesn't make sense. Nothing has changed about our income level. We're definitely not EBT eligible. We're definitely not free lunch eligible. And it says, you don't need to do anything or take any further action. Everyone is now eligible. They just by fiat made every kid in the school a recipient of a little EBT card for free lunch and free breakfast and lunch to eat this food. Now that's tax money that they just decided not needs-based at all to give to everybody. And as well as I do, that a majority of parents will be like, yeah, I don't have to buy lunch anymore.
Right. It makes things easier.
Thank you. And now add that it is one of the SDG goals where they talk about food insecurity and things to teach our very young children. I covered this on a show about a week ago, to teach them what a stigma it is to the kids who get the free lunch to see a kid with a packed lunch from home.
Oh, so they're trying to now shame the people who bring lunch from home to force everybody into eating that school lunch.
And once you decide, just like you just said, but everyone's so used to the government taking care of their kids all day.
Yeah.
Once you get used to something, you cannot imagine anymore. So you wake up one day and you're in, as I've been calling it now, you're in the panopticon. You're in a prison that has no walls, has no bars. It's got lots of cameras and surveillance. They sit on a Chromebook. They're being surveilled. Yeah. Okay. That thing is picking up on every conceivable bit of data it can. You go to SEL class, you fill out a questionnaire. They go into class now, and instead of having here's your assignment on the board, or welcome to class, let's say the Pledge of Allegiance, or if you don't want to do Pledge of Allegiance, let's just, say hello to everybody. It's go put your emotions on the feelings board. And they have to publicly identify, I'm having a good day, a bad day, a sad day, a blue day, or whatever. And then they'll sit around and talk about, why are you blue today? Let's get all up in our feelings. So the create dependency, learned helplessness. What would a narcissist do when cultivating supply? They would love bomb you. They would provide for you, perhaps even whatever it is they think you need. So if it's love and affection, attention, words of affirmation, gifts, whatever, love bomb you to death. Then tell me your feelings, tell me your feelings, tell me how you feel about this and that. Get all up in your emotions to identify what your emotional triggers are. And then if you should start to pull away or ask any questions, I don't know if I agree with that. Don't you want to be a good person? And remember that children in elementary school, according to Erickson, want to know how do I be good? How can I be good? Okay, well, we'll happily hand you the message. Children in middle school, who am I? Who am I? What kind of person do I want to be in this world, identity-wise? We've got answers. You starting to catch on? So eventually you have a population of people coming out of school who they can't imagine another way than collectivism. They can't imagine another way than to have UBI. Why do we not have UBI? It makes so much sense to them. They've never known any different. And already they have parents who are like, abolish the public school. What? How would I function? It's like, so you had children expecting for you to be a ward of the state too? Not just your children? Because that's what you are. Like I said, you are co-parenting with the government. It's not I don't want to do it, therefore you are. And unless and until people start to realize that, if you want to stay in this abusive relationship, I can't stop you. But identify what's going on.
What's the bridge to get from where we are now to where the free market can take over, and where the government schools can give up their stranglehold on the population? And because it's not going to be through the government just saying, okay, we decided we're not going to. I imagine people will have to pull out in droves. And one of the, we saw a lot of people start homeschooling during the COVID time. And it seems to me if that didn't do it, then I don't know what would, because they literally took your kid out of school and told you to stay home with them, screw your job and whatever you needed to be doing. Your kid is staying home now. And then they put the kid on a computer. And so many parents were concerned about screen time, but now your kid's on for 6 hours a day or 8 hours a day, and you're allowing this. So I know a lot of parents decided this was something that they wouldn't accept and decided to take charge of their children's education, but many parents didn't. And when the schools reopened, they just put their kids right back in. And so now we've accepted this really degraded form of education, even from what it was prior to that. So if that wasn't enough for parents to pull out in the droves necessary for the edifice to crumble, then what would be?
Okay, so I don't know that it necessarily needs to be an edifice crumbling. I see it more as a kind of atrophy or attrition kind of a situation, where there's we shift the coalition, we shift the political power, if you will, from the schools to the parents. I mean, there still are more of us than there are union members, than there are people employed by the schools. There's a lot of them, though. Let's get real. There's a scary number. Like, I think it's something like 7 million. Okay.
Wow.
Altogether of union members. So that said, I could be overestimated. It might be more like 5. But anyhow, everyone who can pull out, I believe, should, as a grassroots thing. They don't owe it to anyone else. They just owe it to their children and their family. I'm not saying do it for me or do it for the country. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is what it would take, but I don't think it takes 50% or something. I think if we could get to a place where in any given state you pulled out, let's say 10%. I think that would be a pretty sizable coalition that people would have to start to listen to. In North Carolina, for example, if we have the highest number of homeschoolers of any state. If you measured us against our 2 largest districts around Charlotte and Raleigh-Durham, we're still bigger.
Oh, wow.
So in this state, we're a force to be reckoned with. They do need, just last night, we got a new director of public instruction, beat out in terms of being the nominee. And both were Republicans. I mean, so in other words, one Republican beat out another because in large part, a lot of homeschool families and a lot of parents who are just fed up with what the existing one is doing. So it's a sizable voting block. So, but that's grassroots. The second thing is states, if you have a friendly legislature, so those people can then ideally, this is going to take time, but you start doing what Tennessee is doing, which is investigate, since that federal chunk is not the majority, can you do without it? Can you do without it? And the reason I say this is the most onerous stuff comes from the federal government. Although their chunk of money is the smallest, no governor really wants to be in the position to say, I'm not taking the federal money, right? Because money's fungible. So whatever you don't take has to come out of, everybody here to make up the difference for those services. But I think people need to it's a lot easier to go austerity to say no to that small chunk than it would be you just have to make it up. So do the math, figure out the legalities, hire the lawyers, and figure out how to say no. The states are under no obligation to take the federal money, provided they're still meeting their obligation to the students that their own constitutions oblige them to. So as an example, if it's federal law that states that provide public education, which is all of them, all the state constitutions say we have to do this. And if you're not ready to amend your state constitution, you have to support special needs kids, as an example. Okay. If you say, I don't want to do it using the federal money, though, because that federal money is coming along with a giant string of, and you have to open a mental health center in your school. Here's your free lunch money, but you have to have the trans kids in the bathroom or whatever. You have to observe trans kids and pronouns and all these, and you have to do blah, 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 blah. If you say no to the money, you don't have to do those things. Okay. Some things you do, like support the special needs kids, because your own constitution probably says that. But no, you don't. You don't have to do the title stuff if you can make it up otherwise. So these are things, the Title IX parts that they keep changing. So, Tennessee is in this right now, supposedly doing an investigation if they can say no. Other states should follow suit. Can we say no to the federal money and then you have at least state autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
I think any candidate for federal office, whether it's Congress, Senate, president, who is not talking about eliminating not just the federal Department of Education, but also the parts of the Department of Labor and Health and Human Services that have their hooks into education, is not worth your time. I mean, you should press them and press them and press them, because you're losing a lot of your parental rights through those agencies as well. So these are the things that it's a bottom up and a top down, but top down isn't going to solve it for sure. There's no president you can elect, and there's no member of Congress who's going to get it done all by themselves. It's not going to happen. Parents have to walk away. Parents have to leave and remove their children. Without the children, there's no system. And while I know not everyone's going to do it, if a sizable chunk of people do it, it starts to get noticed. Now, beware. If enough people don't do it quickly enough, they are currently working on the project to outlaw homeschooling again.
This is what I wanted to ask you about. I can imagine that this is going to be a threat to the system. And as it becomes more of a threat, there are going to be attempts to squash it. So what does that look like?
It looks like school choice. So everybody out there right now lobbying for school choice, and they're telling you like, this is the answer. Yay, go Texas, go this, go that. We're doing it. We're doing it. Read the fine print. Sweden did this. They had all kinds of, private schools and school choice. When the government, the federal government, or their government came along and said, so much of the money is going to these little private institutions. So many people are doing this. We can't really be sure that they're all getting the proper education. So we're just going to, private school, we need to have a one normalizing curriculum. And if you think that Common Core is bad, it can be worse. And every time they've gotten a little less constitutional. They've pushed the envelope a little more as far as setting a national curriculum, because they keep tying it to money. So you start having this money, as I said, money's fungible. They call it school dollars. But states start saying, well, we, the state of Texas, are going to give you, or Arizona, $6,800 per kid to go to private school of your school dollars. That's not all the allotment. Let's say it's 14,000 that goes to the school per kid, and they give you 6,800. Well, the rest is going to the public school with no body attached to it. So they're still getting money. They're happy. One less kid to teach, still getting part of the money. It's like the South before the 3/5 rule. Okay. We get to vote on these people. So then the private schools that are, as I told you, cynically, there are a lot of people coming into this really excited to get their hands on that tax money. So their interests are in data mostly. If you check into the origin of most of these companies and these school, like charters and so forth that want to take this ESA money, a lot of them are tied to data companies and data businesses. And so I'm very nervous about their motives. And then, like I said, once they are all using government money, once all the private schools, with very rare exceptions, have a high percentage of students bringing in tax dollars, what do you think is going to happen? Wouldn't you
control the curriculum? It's going to change.
Wouldn't you want them to? I mean, I personally don't want my tax dollars, even if it's only a few of them, going to a madrasa that teaches kids that women need to be second-class citizens. Why should there already are, by the way, there are already tax-funded scholarships in states like Michigan going to an Islamic school for that purpose. And they don't even have full-blown school choice yet. They don't have what they call universal school choice. So the other thing is, by the way, audience, every state has some form of school choice already. So there's homeschool, but there are also various scholarships and fund programs and accounts. You just maybe don't qualify for them. So universal school choice would say that everybody, not needs-based, would have access. It's not like you don't currently have choices. They just want to broaden it out.
School choice impact homeschooling?
Well, if you're in Arizona right now and you take the money, the first thing that happens is you get declassified as a homeschooler and you become like family planned education or something. I think Texas would do that and Arizona would do that. They're looking at doing it in Missouri too, where, oh no, you're not a homeschooler anymore. You're an ESA recipient, whatever. So that means that you are subject to the standards that they want. And currently, again, I hope I'm not making a mistake of which state. I think it's Arizona. The deal is going to be within 2 years, you need to pass a standardized test as chosen by the state.
So you have to teach to the test now.
And if you can't pass that test, you may have to, you will have to put your child back in school and you may have to repay the money.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So there are other situations like that where there's, read between the lines. But the first thing they're doing, even in Texas, it says, no, we're not going to have any, we're not going to decide the curriculum. We're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that as a state.
Mm-hmm.
They're still taking them out of classification as homeschooler and putting them, you have to register. And some states want you to register, like really register. In other words, not just notify and say I'm homeschooling, but names, ages, grades, how many days did you, because you're getting tax money.
Yeah.
And like I said, if you think about it as a taxpayer, don't you kind of want that oversight?
Right.
Otherwise, you could be handing $600-$800 to somebody who's going to go on vacation.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it makes sense that if you're offering somebody a stipend, you would have some regulations that go along with that offer. But with the school choice coming through, are homeschoolers still allowed to homeschool, or are they forced into this new category?
Currently, in most of the states, they're claiming you can keep your doctor, like you can keep your very private homeschool.
Yeah.
I don't know of any that are saying, and therefore no homeschool. They can't, as a legal matter. Okay. Currently, they can't. But remember, who's going to build their political coalition faster?
Mm-hmm.
So if let's say 2/3 of the families in a given state are taking the money to homeschool, and that's probably likely because you have a lot of new homeschoolers that aren't really philosophically homeschoolers. They just see an opportunity.
Sounds great too when you think about all the sacrifice a family has to make in order to have a parent dedicate to homeschooling. That, if you're going to give me something to defray some of the costs, I'm going to want to take that. What are the regulations? What are the strings attached? Oh, that looks pretty easy. I think I can see a lot of people being drawn to that.
Exactly. And then if they come along and say, we can't administer two separate systems. We can't have, the independent people who are homeschooling and then this separate thing and then the private school kids and all that. It's too much of an administrative cost for us to manage. Remember, there's a bureaucracy that has to come into being to manage this. And while they love to grow their bureaucracy, they don't want to grow it to manage this many people.
Right.
So just like that school lunch thing I told you about, where suddenly a parent who can perfectly well afford to send a lunch is getting taxpayer money on a card they don't want and they can't opt out. They're like, I don't want it. How long before homeschool parents will be like, so congrats, we're sending you your stipend. And you're like, no. Oh, and by the way, your monitor is going to be checking in on you in 6 months to see if you're following a such and such curriculum or if you have the proper credentials to be homeschooling. Because, it's only equitable that everybody be doing the same thing. Remember, equity hasn't gone away. This whole DEI thing hasn't gone away. So I keep saying to people, you guys, the unions are lying. They're making a big show of we hate homeschool. Oh, this is terrible, blah, 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 whatever. Don't buy it. One of the original teachers union heads was in on the first discussions of homeschooling years and years and years ago. We're talking 1970s. And everybody's forgotten and brushed under the rug because now it makes for good, rile up the base to get more money to the public schools. They're taking our money. Okay, here's more money. But once it's all done and the states have their school choice and they're falling like dominoes, then they come in and they start lobbying. They go, well, our teachers shouldn't be cut out of working in all those schools. They're getting tax money, but the union teachers Okay, they can't discriminate against union teachers and they carry their membership with them. They'll start allowing private school students to join their union. Then they'll start organizing. Look, there were teachers at Dalton Private School in Manhattan that were saying we want to unionize 2 years ago. So I give it about 5 minutes after universal school choice is in place, the teachers start saying, I want to be part of the union, especially if they're social justice teachers, which pretty much all of them are because they're coming down from the teacher colleges. You're not going to manufacture enough new teachers through some other teacher education process to meet that demand. So then you might say, but Deb, doesn't that contradict what you said before about the market will provide? Yes, but remember I said free market. Free market means that you get to decide who a teacher is, as does the school you choose for your child. When it's tax dollars going to a school that there's an approved or qualified school, it's still the state certifying the teachers, certifying the education program, certifying the whole process. So they decide who becomes a teacher.
So it sounds like school choice is sort of a Trojan horse.
Yes, I would say that's good description. And I take a lot of heat for this because people take it very personally. If they know an individual involved with pushing for it who's sincere or a good person or they're friends with them or whatever. And I don't want to be interpreted as casting aspersions on any individual personally. Okay. Obviously, I don't know everything. So I don't know like who knows how much of what. To a large degree, I believe this is as we've seen with some of the woke stuff, the vast majority of people are probably well-intentioned. They just haven't really thought it through, or they don't really fully understand how the sausage is made in the education industrial complex. And I don't say that to be condescending. I think people are desperate. And I do believe there are bad actors, probably at the sort of tippy top of the political machine. But, you know, the average lobby is a person on the ground, like a parent lobbying for school choice or whatever. I don't know that they know, you know, have this sort of thought about what they just know they want an alternative. They want to get out. They want something else, or they know the school they want their child to go to is a private school over here, or they're already sending their kid to private school and they just want help paying for it. So I'm not sitting here saying there are all these evil, nefarious people who are like scheming, but I think there are some. I think there are some, just like there are in public schooling. There are some nefarious people who are self-interested and out for their own status and money and so forth. Then you have some really highly politically motivated people who are in it because they think it's going to help actually spread the neo-Marxism into the private schools. And that's why I know the unions are lying about their lack of support for it. Anything that gets government dollars into private schools is a plus for a Marxist. So this idea that they're believable, that they're credible, and they're like, oh, it's terrible, you know, school choice. They win. It's like, you know, heads I win, tails you lose. That's how they operate. They did the same thing with Common Core. Oh my God, Common Core is so terrible. Now try taking it away. They'll call you all kinds of names. This is how they operate. So the only way to be truly independent as a parent and have sovereignty over your child's, and when I say sovereignty, people go, oh, what do you think, you're queen and they're your subject? No, okay, autonomy, if you prefer the word, I'm sorry. But I do think of your family as a little bit of your own kingdom. Like it's yours. You're building it. That's your legacy. That's your values made real. And are you going to keep that and defend it as you would if it were your homestead for real on the frontier? Or are you okay being a serf and having your children be born into serfdom?
It's one of the things that the social justice types have done really well is to demonize these words and concepts like autonomy, sovereignty, individuality. These are dirty words. These are words of privilege and oppression instead of, you know, in my graduate program, we were told explicitly that collectivism is this beautiful ideal and that individualism is this selfish, oppressive way of thinking.
It's sad because actually the opposite is true. People forget that it does serve, for example, my personal values to take very good care of my children and to be selfless towards them because I chose to have them. Obviously, because I value them and I think I have something good to put into the world, and that I want to share the beauty that is life with other people and teach them lessons and all kinds of things about how to live life on Earth and share that. I don't want to hoard it all to myself by being an antenatalist, right? I actually want to share that, like give someone else a chance at what I've had, which is life. And so to put them first serves my values. I'm not a martyr. It's selfish in a rational way to take care of my kids. I think what they're describing or what they're talking about, and people get the two twisted, is they're talking about irrational selfishness, a kind of irrational egoism or hedonism. But they've melded the two in people's minds. So you hear individual, it's like, ew, like you said, it's a dirty word, instead of realizing that what a beautiful world it would be if every person who were physically capable and mentally capable of taking care of themselves and their loved ones did so. Then the only people you would need to worry about socially taking care of are those who truly can't take care of themselves. people with disabilities, people who are very elderly, people who are sick, the very, very young who can't take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now your project is much, much smaller. There will always be people who struggle. There will always be people who have some kind of need that they can't fill for themselves. That's always been the case since forever, and it will always be the case. But I think I think our founders understood this, that you'll have the greatest ability to meet their needs if you don't get in the way of the people who are capable. And in fact, if you hold them accountable to do that. So it's not just don't get in their way, but also hold people accountable. Personal responsibility shouldn't be a dirty word. Being uncomfortable that things don't just get handed to you. We know that there is a portion of your brain, I can't remember the name of it, but it actually grows and gets bigger and more capable when you do things you don't want to do. I don't mean things that are, like horrible, but an athlete training and has to do burpees and
discipline.
do sprints, that kind of discipline. And then on the other side of it, not only does it build your self-esteem and your sense of competence, but it physically makes you healthier. You get all kinds of mood stabilizing hormones and stuff that goes on in your brain. And your brain literally becomes more capable of handling the next stressor. And what we are doing, as you probably know, if you've ever spoken to, or read anything from Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt and the Coddling of the American Mind, is that we are turning our children into fragile creatures, very fragile creatures, emotionally, psychologically, which again is what happens in an abusive relationship. If you've ever met somebody in a really abusive, especially one that is emotionally abusive, physically abusive, we see the scars, we see the bruises, but a long-term emotional wearing down of a person and psychological wearing down of their psyche can take even the strongest person as a physical specimen and reduce them to just goo. They just can't cope with daily life. And that is what I see. As Abigail Shrier wrote recently, we have the freest generation of children ever. The most well-off generation. Most kids these days, even those in so-called poverty, have their own bedrooms and their own bathroom, or there's two bathrooms in the home. I grew up with people where it's like one bathroom in the whole house. No, we had two, but a lot of people I knew didn't. And we were considered very, very privileged, right? So there's so many people who have their stories. And now we look at this and it's like, you're stressed?
Yeah.
You're anxious? I'm not saying they don't have any reason to be, but we're feeding that beast instead of leaning into gratitude and saying, look at this amazing world that you live in, this amazing country that you live in. Look at these opportunities that you have. We are telling children to be angry, sad, scared, and dependent.
And yet the freedom that the kids have these days, many kids don't even leave their house.
Correct.
Many kids are basically prisoners in their bedroom with the computer or the TV to mind them, because they're not trusted with the responsibility or forced to go out and greet the world. The way, like, kids in my generation, we were just kicked out of the house in the morning and we had to play outside all day. We weren't allowed to come back in until it was time for a meal.
Exactly. Like I said, you end up a prisoner without walls, without bars. And the more they spend time online, the more data is getting gathered on them, which feeds the beast that is looking for new and different ways to make them more helpless and more of a utility to those in power. And that's what I worry about, is that the current system, if it stays in place and is allowed to grow into what were formerly known as the private schools and even homeschooling, will just suffocate the last vestiges of individual liberty in America. When you can have an MSNBC host joke around that there are these silly people in America who believe that their rights come from their creator. Now, she said God, but whatever it is, God.
Well, who do they come from then?
Congress. Did you not know?
Oh.
She said, they don't realize that their rights come from Congress. And I'm sitting watching this and thinking, and she literally said, Christian nationalism is that. If you read the Declaration of Independence and you agree, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, you're apparently a Christian nationalist. So I, a Jew, and an atheist effectively, but still a Jew, I'm a Christian nationalist now suddenly because I believe in individual liberty and inalienable rights. That's news. But if that's the rhetoric, if we're moving towards a concept of positive rights as opposed to negative rights, positive rights meaning I'm entitled to stuff, I have a right to stuff and the labor of others. Negative rights are what you're not allowed to do to me. Then we're in trouble because that is what you have in a totalitarian state. People think totalitarian states will look like Nazi Germany, but no, it looks like China. And that's more where we're headed. That's the direction we're headed, more towards the China/Russia model, not towards the Nazi Germany model.
So when so many parents are unwilling even to criticize, as you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, when you talked about the other parents in the school that you tried to rally, how do you get through to parents that not only do they need to criticize, they need to seriously consider pulling their kids out? And then how do homeschoolers form a lobby that can effectively organize and push back on some of these things?
Well, sort of like being on the plane that's going down, put your own oxygen mask on first. So the first thing I tell people is, before you start, going out and agitating or complaining, look at your own child. Take a long, hard look at your own child right now. How are they doing? How are they doing psychologically? How are they doing academically? Start there. Your first order of business and your first responsibility as a parent is to your children. Don't worry about other people's. It is not your job to save the schools. It is not your job to save all the other kids, right? So look at your child. Now figure out where their need is greatest in terms of if they seem like they're doing okay psychologically, but academically they're behind, then focus there. If it's, but you focus inward on your own family. Once you really tune back into that, because unfortunately, a lot of the parents that we're describing right now are a little checked out. And please don't hear blame. I'm not trying to judge anyone. I'm saying this is the nature of the beast. You don't spend all day with your child. So you have to reconnect. So check in, try to get an understanding without being annoying about it. Like, tell me. I mean, but just start having family dinners, start getting together, take inventory of what's going on in their life, start looking at what's coming home in the school bag and the Chromebook. And rather than, oh my God, I'm running to the school board, make a plan for next year. We're coming into April. So if you're thinking about this and think, all right, I'm going to have what's left of this year plus the summer to figure out my game plan after that, before the government says, turn your kid over again in September. And I'm going to use that time to get to know my kid or kids, to get to know my own family's rhythm. Like, do we need the second income if it's a 2-income situation? If I'm a single parent, how much money do I really need to make ends meet? Who do I know in the community? Build your community. Build your network of parents or loved ones, family, neighbors, other parents who might share you. You just start going for coffee with people that and just like, are you guys happy with the school? What do you think about it? They go, yeah, we're thrilled. Okay, move on. Next part. Just start trying to build that network. You don't need 10 people. You need 2 or 3. And just start building kind of a little cohort of people where you could start sharing ideas. Like, if I pulled my son out and you pulled your daughter out, and even though they're different ages, like, do you think there's a way maybe we might be able to share some like time stuff? Start floating these things. Look locally, like, are there organizations? Does the Y have a program? Blah, blah, blah. So do some research and then, compare and contrast it with sending them back to school. So what I tell people is, instead of thinking you've got to make a final decision today, do the homework necessary to get to know your child and how they're doing. And then you look at like the pros and cons and make yourself a Ben Franklin list. Pros and cons of sending them back, pros and cons of pulling them out. Here's what I would need to backfill for this, for that. And then you can sit there and with your partner, spouse, whoever you're raising your children with, or by yourself, and decide. It's going to be a very different conversation if your child is in 10th grade and on the varsity basketball team, as an example, possibly looking for a scholarship to college or something like that, versus your child is 10 and going into the 5th grade. These are wildly different. That's why I can't make a prescription. But I do know that you have to start inward with your own family. Then once you've done this and decided, I'm going to do something different, and it's going to look like this. First task is to de-school your child. If they've been in school for a time, they've got to get out of the mindset of I wake up and I show up at a building and I speak when spoken to and all this. And that can look different for each kid, but it really doesn't involve diving into curriculum day one. It's, get in the habit of not being on a device. Let's do that. Let's get in the habit of like, come with me to the grocery store. Here's, we've got a budget of $100. Let's go figure it out, do the math in your head. I mean, it's not academic. It's just like, let's get into the rhythm of life. And then we'll figure out what you need to do. If your child is over 15 and legally able to work, factor in a job, even if it's bagging groceries, if it's working at a Chick-fil-A or something like that, because nothing makes a kid more curious about how the real world works than work. Suddenly they're like, okay, I need to bone up on my math. Like, I don't want to do this for a living for the rest of my life. They get a little more motivated when they're out in the world than when they're locked in a school building. And so then after about your first year, let's say you were out for a year, you not only will you meet other homeschoolers, but you'll start to get a sense of what role you want to play in lobbying or taking it any bigger. It's not for everyone. There's some parents who are like, I don't want to do it at all. I want to raise my family and go on with my business and mind my own business. And I don't want to get involved in this crusade. And that is absolutely, what kind of individualist would I be if I said, shame on you, right? No, please do. But for those who feel like I want to help other people be able to do what I'm doing, there's no shortage of people who want your help and want your example. Just start asking around. Go on the internet. You'd find me in 5 minutes. Can you put me in touch with some other people? I want to be an advocate. Let me give you some names, right? So the beauty of the internet and of social media, the good thing about it is that it's actually, you're one search away from finding like-minded people who are doing what you're doing or want to do what you want to do. And you don't ask, you don't get. You need help, ask for it. There's no more generous community in this country, in my opinion, than the homeschooling community. They do it all different ways, but people are super eager to help you and tell you, like, this is what I tried. Talk to that person. They tried a different way and so forth. So that's how you do it. You just go back to square one of like, how did you do anything? How did you buy your house? How did you figure out what neighborhood you wanted to live in? How did you figure out who to marry or, have babies with in the first place? You went through an iterative, evaluative process. You're going to have to do the same thing when you decide breast milk or formula. Should we co-sleep or put them in a crib? Like, how many decisions did you make before your child was ever a school age? Just get back in that groove in your headspace. And now it's education. You're not expected to know everything. Do you know what all the foods that are best for them at any given moment? No, you have to look into it. Same thing. It's food for their brain. That's it.
I think that the word you used, de-school, was a really good word. And I've kind of described my process as sort of deinstitutionalizing myself. It really helped me to read John Taylor Gatto and sort of realize some of the origins of the compulsory schooling movement and to kind of take a step back from making assumptions about how we're supposed to live and how we're supposed to raise our children, and realize that we actually have a lot more freedom to construct this in our own families. And we don't have to go by some particular formula. We don't have to accept that.
Exactly. And we're getting back to that whole abusive relationship thing. Very, very often, it's like you have the power all along, Dorothy. Click your heels together and just go home. Just walk out the door. A lot of times I think people are looking for permission, or they're looking for it to be okay with someone else other than themselves. Now, again, I meet people all the time, both men and women, who say my spouse won't go for it. There's no way. Well, first thing I'd say to you is give them a chance, build a case. Just because you're married to somebody doesn't mean they're just going to agree with everything you say on anything, what car to buy, where to live, everything. So yes, this is a big decision. So expect to have to make a case for it. But I truly believe that unless you are literally in an abusive relationship or one where you're probably not a good fit, if you bring your case to them and it's well thought out and it's well reasoned and planned, the thing that most people fear is the unknown. So you can't just broach it as, I think we should homeschool. That's like, you've just presented them with chaos. But if you come and say, I've been doing a little research and I think next year what I'd like to do is, and you go through it and this is how I'm going to handle it and it's how it's going to work. It's a rare person, unless their values are really screwed up. Like, what will people think? I mean, that might happen. And I know people who have spouses who say those things, and I feel bad for them because that's not great. It's not a great indicator of a healthy relationship. If you're like, what will other people not in this relationship think about how we raise our children? Is probably, but it happens. So I accept the fact that I know it happens. And I will say that for those parents who find themselves in that situation, you're still not SOL. What I mean by that is there's still ways, even if your child has to stay in this current system, that you can, you know, help your child deal with it as best you can. And I don't like that they have to deal with it or you have to deal with it, but you certainly don't throw up your hands and go, oh, well, you still have to fight that beast some kind of way. And I can help with that too. I do have a support group right now that is through Discord where parents can join and get support twice a week as needed to talk through like, all right, I do have to leave my child in the school, but this is what's going on in their class. Do you have any suggestions? And I'd say 9 times out of 10, it's suggestions for conversations to have with the child. Ways to remediate or backfill at home for missing information or put questions in their head. Sometimes it's just to teach their kid to be subversive. And I hate saying that, but you have to do it.
It's great that you have a resource for parents to talk about that kind of thing. One of the things with my my older kids, they're now in their mid-20s, but when they were going through school, they went through the public school system. I had this sort of idea that I didn't want to push my thoughts and ideas on them. So I wanted them to be able to develop their own perceptions of the world and their own ideas. So I didn't want to overly impress my way of thinking on them. And it wasn't until much later that I realized, well, the school system wasn't holding back. The school system that they were in was trying very hard to impress certain values and worldviews on my children. And so by not speaking up for what I believed, I wasn't in that dialogue the way with as much, my thoughts didn't carry as much weight as what they were being told by their teachers. And so it is, I think that there are a lot of parents who aren't going to be able to pull their kids out of school for whatever reason, for a variety of reasons. They're stuck with what they're doing right now. And there have to be some practical solutions to help mitigate.
Yes. But I would suggest to them that it's not going to involve going to the school board meeting and yelling into the microphone. It's not going to involve really interacting much with the school. In fact, the less you interact with them, the better, I would say at this point, because it is an openly hostile, nakedly hostile relationship where anybody that appears on their radar their child could be targeted. So you really don't want to do that. I'll be honest, you just really don't want to do that unless your child is like in immediate danger and you potentially have a case for a lawsuit or something, then you have to deal with it. But if it's just, the social studies teacher is an obvious Marxist and pushing the idea that Mao was a great guy. All right, that stinks. But good news, there's freedom of speech in America and your child does come home. And as frustrating as it is, you can say, and I don't recommend, especially with teenagers, saying, well, that teacher's an idiot, because they're just going to dig in, right? Unless they already think the teacher's full of beans, they're probably going to dig in. So instead, it's like, what do you think about that? That's interesting. That's very different than what we were taught when I was in school. And, kids are rebellious and they're curious generally, even if they're not curious in school. They're like, well, what did they teach you? Well, I was taught that he led to a famine and was actually a totalitarian dictator who caused a lot of problems, whatever. And then you could even go and pull out some resources and say, well, are you guys looking at this in school? I was just kind of curious, like approach it like I just want to be in the conversation with you. And if the child is just taking a superficial, like, Mom, I don't know, I just have to do it right for the test. I don't care what the teacher says. Okay. Then you decide if you want to push or not. If you want to say, look, this is really important, and I really do want you to understand that there's two sides to the story, or you could back up for a little bit and check it out. Because one of the side effects, because people say, well, my kid doesn't buy into that. Okay, that's half battle one. But do you really want your child walking out into the world ignorant of what actually happened and deeply cynical about the trustworthiness of adults? So you still have the opportunity to fill in as the truly trustworthy adult, the one who's actually knowledgeable. And this is another area where I think parents have been beaten down to where they don't trust their own knowledge. They don't trust their own ability to find things out, their own gut instincts about something being wrong. But approaching them with questions like, what do you think about that? Does that make sense to you? You think that's true? If you've seen the video with Warren Smith, have you seen it? The one who did who questioned the student about J.K. Rowling. It went viral where he did a Socratic. Why do you say that? Oh, really? Where did you hear that? Oh, you said some people said. So I was wondering which people said. So And eventually, by the end of about a 5-minute conversation, the kid was like, yeah, I kind of feel stupid now. Like he realized he was just repeating. So as long as you engage in that way, you can have productive conversations that put doubt, treat it almost like you're a lawyer trying to create reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt goes a long way. If you can do that so that your child goes into the classroom and goes, I don't know about this. This doesn't really make sense. You're good. You'll be okay. Because that's what they're trying to crush. They're trying to crush the little voice in their head that says, this doesn't feel safe. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't make sense. My brain works on its own. I don't repeat what other people say to me. I got to check it out. And whether you're talking about history and, political theory and so forth, or gender, what is the thing the child knows most about themselves at age 6? That they're a boy or girl. That's like the one thing they're sure of, right? About their identity or themselves. And to have the doubt put in their head right away of like, that might not be true. Mom and dad assigned it to you. The doctor assigned, is terribly destabilizing. Not for every kid, but for lots of kids.
For lots.
And but you have the opportunity, that's how well it works, to plant the seed of doubt where it belongs. For them. That's why what I mean when I say subversive, that's what I mean.
That comes full circle, really, in the conversation back to the efforts to undermine someone's judgment and cause confusion about your own perception.
That is the core of abuse.
Ultimately, it's really awful that you would have to provide your kid with strategies to avoid that and then send them into that environment every day. And I feel like I would love to talk with you again at some point if you would like that, because I feel like there's a lot more conversation to be had. Do you have where can people find your work, and do you have any recommendations for people?
Well, first with the recommendations, as I said, get back to basics for yourself. Educate yourself as much as you possibly can about your own child. To get to know them again, as well as you knew them as a baby and a toddler. And so that's my number one recommendation: reconnect with your child. That goes a long way to protecting them from all the ills that are in our schools right now. No yelling at a school board or getting the right person in public office is going to make up for that. Then the next recommendation is educate yourself about what it is they are actually doing in their actual classroom, in their actual school. And don't take no for an answer. So get on that Chromebook. If they tell you there's a special password, get it. Get your kid to give it to you. Don't take no for an answer. Ask questions of your child about the assignments. What did you do inside the school today versus what you brought home for homework, and so on? What are you reading? How do you choose your books, etc.? Get yourself a list of books together in advance at your child's reading level, which, by the way, you're going to have to test for yourself. You're going to have to hand your child a book and ask them to read to you aloud. Do not take anybody's word for it that they are reading at its 9th grade level, 10th grade level, 6th grade, whatever. Have them read to you from a book. And then go make yourself a list of books that you think are great. Maybe you read from your childhood or whatever, and have it at the ready. So that when you find that there's an assigned book that they need to read that you disapprove of, rather than going to the school and saying, I disapprove of this book, you go in saying, my child would like to read this book instead. So you don't even comment about that book. You have a book ready to go. And you can even make it diverse. Sounder, you can make it I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. I mean, pick some wonderful pieces of literature that they'd be hard pressed to say no to. And then fight that battle if it comes to you. So if they go in with the book and the teacher says, no, they're really going to have to read this other book, then you could say, why? And only then can you say, yeah, well, I disagree that that's best for my child individually. I understand that that's what but that's not going to work for us. So I have a list. Would you pick one of these others? So you make it increasingly hard for them to say no. Take back your power, own the narrative, stop asking permission to say my child is going to be reading this, and make them say no, make them say why, and document everything. So these are my suggestions. And then you just kind of get through it with each and every class. Expect to do remediation. Expect that your child probably doesn't know their multiplication tables.
Mm.
Expect that there are gaps in their learning, and you're going to, rather than yelling about it, figure out a way to make it up. And
You
then
know,
finally,
you know what's interesting is
yeah,
as you're saying this, what I'm thinking is, gosh, that's a lot of work. And
it
parents
is.
don't
Yeah.
realize how much
Yeah.
work it takes to really. I feel like homeschooling has been easier than keeping up with all the stuff that used to come home from the school and trying to, double check everything. So I feel like actually administratively, homeschooling is a lot easier than, doing school as a parent, right?
You're
So to
counter
speak.
parenting.
Yeah.
So anybody who's ever been in a contentious custody battle or divorce or anything who's watching this in the audience will know exactly what I'm talking about. Where if you're not absolutely aligned with the other person, I mean, even if you're still married to them, you are counter parenting.
Hmm.
You're not just parenting. You're like, oh, he told you what? She told you.
Yeah.
She said what? And now you've got to do this extra thing. Well, it's the same with the school, and they have your child 8 hours a day. So yes, it
Yeah.
is more work, but I tell people like it's hard no matter how you slice it. So choose your hard.
Mm.
And if the hard that you're forced to choose for whatever reason is that they have to go to school, you're not, there is no easy button. There's no set it and forget it. There never was. There never really was. So people go, but it used to be. No, it wasn't then either. It's just exponentially worse now where it's not
Yeah.
even safe.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly not psychologically safe, but even the average student says that the first time they ever experience violence personally is in a school.
Mm-hmm.
So know that too. But those are my recommendations, and I'm available. The way people can find me and my work is I have a YouTube channel called The Reason We Learn, and I have a lot of videos there that go into depth on a lot of the topics about why things are this way and what the goal is for the schools.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have a private community through a platform called wokescreen.com. It's a website. And then on the website for members, people can join as a monthly member or an annual member. I do 2 private videos, live streams a week on
Mm-hmm.
Mondays and Fridays. One is about homeschooling and homeschooling related topics, and one is about just sort of culture in general, but they're private. And my members can suggest topics or ask questions, say, hey, could you make a video about this or that? And that'll make it there.
Mm-hmm.
I also keep a Discord is attached to that. So they
Mm-hmm.
join that, they get access to the member area of the website, and there's a private Discord. The private Discord, in addition to being able to chat with each other, if they want to ask a question of a community, it's pretty small right now, but I'm hoping to grow it.
Mm-hmm.
They can access my resources. I have a resources channel in the Discord where I post all kinds of things, everything from curriculum to articles I think are interesting to read to all those replays of the live streams. And parents can go in there and, sub search by different topics to get help. And like, how do I put my kids' education back together?
Mm-hmm.
And if they want to join an actual focused support group, I have through wokescreen.com a community called The Reason We Parent.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they can join monthly or annually, and we meet twice a week, Wednesdays and Sundays. And they can come in. I just sit there. Like I log on and I log into a live call. You don't have to show your face. It's just audio, but I can share screen and so can you.
Mm-hmm.
And that means if somebody has a picture of like, this came home from school, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So rather than having people try to communicate with me one-on-one and then they pay for an hour of consulting time or whatever for a much lower price, they can be a monthly member, pop in on one of those
Mm-hmm.
2 days a week and just be like, all right, this is going on. I don't know what to do. And pick my brain, vent, just get support, get a boost, moral support, whatever they need. I'm putting together my case for my spouse for homeschooling. Can you look it over? Like
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to help the broadest range of people at the lowest price possible. So I set this up through Discord. And that's basically what I'm offering is the YouTube and the wokescreen.com communities.
Well, it sounds like a fantastic resource, and you're very well versed in all of these issues. It's a wealth of information and really empowering for parents. I hope people will check this
I hope
out.
so. I hope so. I just want people to get their personal power back and not be dependent on the state. The state is not your friend. I'm not even your friend. Like you don't know me from a hole in the wall, but here's the beauty of it. I don't have police power over you.
Yeah.
So there's that,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Deb, thank you so much for this conversation.
You're so welcome.
Thank you for joining me. And I will include links to everything in the description of this video. So if people want to check out your work, I hope that they will. And
Right.
I hope to speak with you again soon.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.